One of my favourite subplots from the beginning of the Thousand Year Blood War arc was when the Quincy were revealed to be able to steal the Shinigami's Bankai. Now up until this point, Bankai had been touted as the ultimate trump card, the last resort of a Shinigami who could use it to turn the battle's tide in their favour. And to have it stolen so unceremoniously, have it ripped from them so easily and then be used against them was a real game changer and a twist that I honestly didn't see coming, but really enjoyed nonetheless. It helped to really elevate the threat level of the Vandenreich at the start of this arc. Now, the science behind how they stole the Bankai was never really explained. They have these special medallions that they can use to just take the Bankai as soon as it's activated. It doesn't really never explain how it works, but I always assumed, at least anyway, that because Bankais were perhaps more physical constructs of Reishi than some of their Shikai counterparts, it was easier just to strip them away from the Shinigami using the Quincy's innate domination over Reishi, but it is only speculation, unfortunately. However, like I said, I really enjoyed this twist, and I actually thought Kubo was doing this to, give the older captains a chance to use their Bankais, put them in the spotlight more, because it's normally the younger captains, Komamura, Hitsugaya, Byakuya, that resort to their Bankai almost immediately. And so I thought what Kubo was doing here was using them to kind of get that out of the way. They now can't use their Bankai, so now we would see the Bankai of other captains instead. And that didn't really pan out like that in the end, although we did end up seeing a lot of Bankai in the final arc anyway. In this video, I want to take a look at the characters who had their Bankai stolen from them and look at basically how it affected them, the outcomes for those characters, maybe how some of them grew and changed differently, because Kubo does focus a little bit on each character that did have their Bankai stolen from them. And like I said, it is one of my favourite parts of the first part of this arc. It really helped to elevate the tension and make it really look like the Shinigami were in trouble. Because Kubo was playing up something quite interesting here, I thought. It looked like Bankai was maybe going to play a larger role in this arc as an actual story mechanic. Because Kubo was dropping threads here and there, the Vandenreich might actually be afraid of a Shinigami's Bankai, which I thought was a really fascinating idea. Because obviously Kurge OP is doing everything he can to prevent Ichigo from using his Bankai, and it's not working and he's freaking out about it. And Ichigo even himself directly confronts the Sternritter and says, are you guys afraid of Bankai? To which Kurge gives a pretty telltale response. He starts freaking out even more, being like, of course we're not. The Vandenreich are afraid of nothing. Which really told me that actually, yes, they are afraid of it. And I would love to have seen that played out a bit more. The only thing I don't like about the Bankai-stealing subplot really is that it did resolve itself so neatly and so conveniently, and so early on as well. I definitely didn't expect them to get their Bankais back at the start of the second invasion, but that is how it happened. I think Kubo maybe decided to remove the emphasis on this subplot a little bit, but regardless, what we did get, I enjoyed. Before we begin this video, however, guys, if you haven't subscribed to me yet, we are closing in on 40,000 subs, and I'd love to make that number by the end of the year if possible. So if you haven't subscribed yet and you love Bleach, you are in the perfect place for videos like this every single week. Also, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up, because it really does help with the YouTube algorithm and exposure on YouTube as well. And don't forget to hit the notification bell to make sure you get all of my videos in your sub box every single week. So a few high-ranking Shinigami lose their Bankai to the Quincy invaders at the start of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, and like I said, I like this. I think maybe this is reading into it a little bit too much, but it sort of felt to me like this militaristic organization is bringing in new technology to take on the more traditional and, as we know in Yhwach's eyes, weaker Shinigami who have grown old and complacent over time, and this new tech comes in that's just able to utterly annihilate everything they do, that can just negate and cancel out what's worked for the Shinigami for so many years. I really like that idea. I think that's really, really cool, especially since the Vandenreich, in the sort of way they dress, they do look a little bit more like the modern era, sort of bringing in those World War II vibes, whereas the Shinigami are obviously considerably more traditional, a lot older in the way they look. And I think it really kind of makes sense that they get steamrolled early on because of this new technology that the Vandenreich have. I think that's a really cool way of looking at it. But the first one to lose his Bankai is actually a vice captain, which is Lieutenant Chojiro Tadaoki Sasakibe of the 1st Division. Now, unfortunately, this is completely off-screen, and I really hope that the anime actually shows us this fight. It is a shame that Chojiro loses his first ever battle in the series, pretty much, and dies as a result of it, but I would still like to see it regardless. Just because I think it could kind of lend an additional perspective to this very initial invasion, because this very first one is really, really short. I think Akon mentions that it's over in like 100 seconds or something like that. It's really, really small. It may be like 3 minutes long or something, 180 seconds. But what you can infer happens is that Driscoll Bursey, whether he's on his own or not is impossible to say, but he at least arrives from the shadows by one of the main gates near the 1st Division, and he begins fighting not only Chojiro, but also a regiment of Squad 1 soldiers. Now, Driscoll kills them all and obviously becomes more powerful thanks to his overkill shrift. And what we know is that Chojiro activates his Bankai Koko Gonryu Rikyu and has it immediately stolen. And the moment it's stolen, Driscoll's able to kill him. So what I would assume happens here is because Chojiro is essentially case zero, he is the one that unfortunately discovers this for the first time. He's so shocked and, you have to presume, terrified by what happens that Driscoll's able to get a free hit on him using his massive reishi javelins that he can summon. Now I did also find this kind of weird because I'm pretty sure if they're fighting by the gate, I feel like they say it's the north gate, but I can't remember exactly. If they're fighting by the gate, that means they're on ground floor level, and I'm pretty sure Yamamoto's office is not on ground floor level. So I don't really understand how Chojiro manages to fly into Yamamoto's office, but it's a cool visual all the same. But that's the first case of someone losing their Bankai that we have in the series. And what's interesting as well is you can also infer that Driscoll doesn't use Chojiro's Bankai against him because Chojiro doesn't seem to know that they have stolen it. Chojiro just thinks they've done something to it. Now, the translation was always a bit fuzzy here, but with Chojiro's last words, he kind of tells Yamamoto that the Quincy invaders can do something to their Bankais. Now, unfortunately, this miscommunication from Chojiro would lead to the loss of a number of Bankai in the first invasion. But regarding Chojiro himself, unfortunately for him, he's never given a chance to kind of really take in the fact that he's lost his Bankai or do anything about it, as he is hit and killed by one of these javelins nearly immediately. But Chojiro's role is to try and pass some information on to Yamamoto before he dies. Unfortunately, though, like I said, it does lead to a pretty big mistake in the first invasion. So during the first invasion, Shinigami captains Byakuya, Komamura, Soifon and Hitsugaya all decide to work in tandem with their vice captains to take on the Sternritters, who are now fully invading. This is the proper first invasion at this point. And they all decide to use their Bankai at once, because Chojiro's dying words have led them to believe that their Bankai will be sealed away and therefore impossible to use. However, by teaming up with their vice captains at their side, they believe that they can still fight the Sternritter with just their Shikai. Honestly, it's not a bad plan, as long as you think that the intel you've got is correct. And of course, it's not quite right. So what happens is all four of them use their Bankai immediately, and all four of them are stolen from them straight away. As not Kangdu, BG9 and Bambietta take the Bankai from the captains, and it is now theirs to use as they wish. This is a pretty crazy moment in my opinion. And a lot of people in the forums and stuff really laid into the captains here, saying how stupid they were to just kind of walk into the Quincy's trap. But I never really saw it like that. I think they were just going off the intel they had. And you have to remember as well that this is a crazy, unprecedented situation for the Soul Society. Not only are they under attack, but the entire enemy force is on Soul Society's soil. Like they have arrived. They are walking among the buildings, among the homes of the officers and stuff like that. You know, this is a emergency situation. It's do or die at this point, and they're going to use their Bankai. As Kyoraku says to Robert Akutrone, "You guys aren't enemies we can defeat without Bankai." It is a shame that they didn't really wait, because Miuri comes out and basically chastises them for not waiting for his analysis, so you have to assume that Miuri has discovered that they can steal Bankai, although I wouldn't know how he's managed to do that. But regardless, all four of these captains lose their Bankai in one fell swoop. What I always found interesting about this is Hitsugaya. Now, Hitsugaya, when he loses his Bankai, he tries to talk to Hyorimaru, and he says, like, "Hyorimaru, say something to me, anything," and Hyorimaru is completely silent. Now, I kind of thought this was a bit weird, because I thought that this meant that they lost their Zanpakuto spirit. I was like, whoa, their whole Zanpakuto spirit has been just sapped out of the blade, and it's now an empty sword, essentially. But we find out that they can still use Shikai, so that's clearly not the case. So I don't really know why Hyorimaru is just not talking to Hitsugaya at this point, and actually it does seem like the Zanpakuto spirit has gone entirely, because much later on in the second invasion, Hitsugaya mentions to Hyorimaru that He's glad he can hear his voice again. He's glad that he's come back to him. So clearly the spirit is going with the Bankai here, which is a bit weird, so I don't know how they can still use Shikai. But regardless, it's a pretty crazy moment to see Hitsugaya so desperate like that and so afraid of what's happened. Now, we know, of course, after this, the only two Sternritter to actually use the Bankai are Asnot and Kangdu. Kangdu doesn't have too much luck with his, but Asnot is able to nearly kill Byakuya using his own Bankai. Also, the fact that Kangdu uses Hitsugaya's Bankai in the first invasion does lead to a slight inconsistency later on when Kang mentions to Hitsugaya that this must be the first time you've ever seen your Bankai from this angle, whereas no, you literally used it against him in the first invasion as well. But you know, maybe he forgot in the heat of the moment. But after those two, we now move on to Driscoll Bursey, who finally returns, and he is using Sasakibe's Bankai Koko Gonryu Rikyu, and he uses it against Yamamoto, and it's here we get something quite interesting. And it seems like the Sternritter can't use the Bankai as well as the captains, and that obviously makes complete sense. Yamamoto says that Sasakibe's Bankai was never this weak, and then he proceeds to just incinerate Driscoll in one hit, obviously avenging his fallen vice-captain. But it's interesting, again, that the Sternritter can't use the Bankai to the fullest potential, and again, I thought that was maybe going to be a key to defeating them later on, but like I said, the whole Bankai-stealing plot is kind of dropped faster than I had anticipated. Driscoll using Sasakibe's Bankai also, in my opinion anyway, seems to open up another inconsistency regarding this plotline. Driscoll's obviously using the Bankai of a dead man, and I don't think that necessarily in itself is an issue, because the Bankai has been ripped apart from the Zanpakuto and they are completely separate now at this point. What is weird, however, is that Lil Barrow, way later on down the line, tells Shunsui that, you know, it doesn't matter if you're using Bankai, as we know for a fact that if the user is killed, the Bankai dies with him. So that definitely doesn't make sense, because his Bankai is still alive and kicking along with Driscoll. So yeah, that's a little bit weird. And finally, right at the end of the first invasion, Yamamoto uses his Bankai, Zanka no Tachi, to fight the fake U-Haul Bankai. Now, Yamamoto says to who's actually Roid Lloyd, he kind of gives his own version of events. So he basically believes that they can't steal his Bankai, and they can't steal Ichigo's Bankai because they don't know the true potential of Ichigo's Bankai. But obviously what actually happens is that Yuhal Bark himself turns up and is able to easily take Yamamoto's Bankai off him, saying that the only reason we haven't taken your Bankai so far is because I'm the only one with power capable enough of wielding it. So clearly the Reiatsu of the two people has to be somewhat similar, which makes sense for the Sternritters to be able to take the captain's Bankai and for Yuha to be able to take Yama's Bankai. They are roughly even in terms of Reiatsu. And again, I don't think it's ever actually clarified as to why Ichigo's Bankai can't be stolen. Let me know in the comments below if it is, but I'm pretty sure it's never totally said. I think it could be down to a couple of things. The hollow inside him, obviously the hollow Reiatsu would be poisonous to the Quincy, and they must know about it, so they obviously don't want to take his Bankai for that reason. But having said that, Kurge does try and steal it, so if he didn't want that, he wouldn't be doing it, and it actually just seems to properly deflect him. So whether it's the fact that Ichigo's innate Reiatsu is just enormous comparison to Kurge's and therefore he can't take it, it's never fully iterated on. But it could be something like that. Unfortunately, when Yamamoto's Bankai is stolen from him, he is nearly instantly killed. Much like Chojuro, he doesn't get much of a chance to grow or use his Bankai without it, but we do get a precious few panels with him where he looks utterly defeated, and I always thought that was really, really cool and really interesting. It was a great sort of character moment. This whole chapter is just incredible anyway. I think it's 510 when he gets his Bankai stolen, and he doesn't, I think after he loses his Bankai, he says nothing else either. He knows it's over at this point. He looks exhausted, and it must be strange. It must be strange to lose your Bankai. It must feel really weird, like, because obviously a Shinigami and a Zanpakuto are connected. There is a bond there, and to lose such a huge part of that, forcibly get ripped from you. Again, this is why I really wanted to see more from this concept, because I really enjoyed it, but regardless, Yamamoto is helpless against Yuhal Bark and is then cut down. Now, losing their Bankai leads to almost 4 different avenues for the captains who have survived the first invasion. Obviously, Byakuya is near death and ends up going to the Royal Palace for rehabilitation and to hopefully improve his health situation. He doesn't really have a chance to mull over the fact that he has lost Senbon Zakura Kageyoshi, at least not yet anyway. Soifon is a weird one. She's the one we definitely see the absolute least of. She's the one whose plotline is never really followed at all. All we really get from it is that Omaida wonders why she didn't take him training with her, and we see that she is doing a one-handed handstand on top of a mountain or something, which is pretty impressive. And eventually, during the second invasion, she reveals that she has mastered her Shunko and learned Mukyu Shunko, and her Shunko now takes the form of massive wind wings, almost like a hornet's wings or something, which does look really neat. But it makes sense, and I like that Soifon was at least able to double down on learning something else in her arsenal rather than just wallowing in the fact that she lost her Bankai forever. Or at least she thought it was forever anyway. But it's weird that we don't see anything from her regarding her training. Hitsugaya is another interesting one who obviously thinks he has lost everything by losing his Bankai. He thinks, the Zanpakuto spirit is gone. But Hitsugaya is a weird one because he decides to go back to basics and actually join in with the tutelage going on in the 10th division in Zanjutsu. So basically these must be like entry-level Shinigami, learning how to basically swing a sword. And it's cool that Hitsugaya does that. It's quite humble. He goes back to them. He decides to start from the beginning again and retrain himself now that he has lost his Bankai. And I actually do think this is a very mature moment for Hitsugaya. He says to himself to train himself to let go of that which has been lost and is not coming back. And I think that's interesting. It's a strong mindset, especially when, again, you consider how long it takes to learn Bankai, how much a bond with a Zanpakuto actually is. Hitsugaya must have lost a lot here, but he is willing to just move on, which I was always quite impressed by. And then finally, Komamura does get the most interesting plotline of them all, where now that he has lost his Bankai, he decides to learn the humanization technique of his clan, and he does so by going to his grandfather deep within a cave near the Soul Society outskirts, and sacrifices everything, essentially, for the power to defeat Bambietta. Now, what's kind of weird about Komamura is that I don't know if he was anticipating getting his Bankai back, because he actually gets it back before he reveals his humanization technique. So I don't know if maybe he was like, oh, I wish I hadn't done this now. Or because the fact that because his Bankai sheds its armor once he uses the humanization technique. So it does feel like they were supposed to be used together. But regardless, Komamura's plotline is definitely the most interesting of the four. Much later, when Byakuya returns to face Az again with Rukia, Byakuya does reveal that he has sort of changed the way he perceived his relationship with his Zanpakuto because of what happened to his Bankai. He says that after Az stole it, he gave him a chance to take a step back and look at everything. And he says that his Zanpakuto, a relationship with his Zanpakuto is much like pointillism, I think he says, that we have to take a step back to really appreciate everything. And because of that, he's increased his power immensely. Like his Shikai is now as all-encompassing as his Bankai, apparently, which is crazy. But regardless of the avenues they take, they do all eventually gain their Bankai back once Urahara gives them the Shinayaku pills, which allow them to holofy momentarily, which poisons the Ryatsu inside the Quincy. And again, this is interesting because it means that the Shinigami did retain some link to their Bankai even after the Quincy were using it. Because Kang has Hitsugaya's wings, and yet he is poisoned when Hitsugaya has the Shinayaku pill. So there is some link left over there, or else it wouldn't affect Kang. It's not a completely separate entity. So you have to wonder how the Bankai feel about being used against their former masters, because obviously Senbon Sakura Kageyoshi probably didn't want to just absolutely wreck Byakuya, but it was doing anyway. Whereas when Hitsugaya gets half his Bankai back, Kang is no longer able to hurt him with it. So it is kind of interesting. I think that there was definitely scope there for more of this to be explained to us, but regardless, I did find it pretty fascinating. And that's pretty much it for this video, guys. The Shinigami get their Bankai back, and then from there on managed to get a succession of wins against the Sternritters. And it was a really interesting subplot that I just think Kubo could have done a little bit more with, and I think maybe he grew tired of it or something like that. He wanted to get the battles into full swing with the Shinigami actually using their full power, and so he eventually just gave them their Bankai back. Now, I have to say, I thought the way they got their Bankai back actually made a lot of sense, and I really enjoyed that. And I loved that it called back to the Everything But the Rain flashback. I just wish it had happened a little bit later, that's all. And it would have also given the Bankai-stealing Quincy a chance to be in the spotlight a little bit more. But regardless, for the most part, I did like the Bankai-stealing plot. Alright guys, but I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the Bankai-stealing plotline at the beginning of the 1000-Year Blood War arc. Did you enjoy it? Did it make any semblance of sense to you? Or did you think it was just a cheap way for the Quincy to get a quick victory over the Shinigami? Now, I did see a few people saying stuff like that, how the Quincy were cheaters. I kind of get that, but again, I think it's that new tech versus old tech thing that gave the Quincy the edge at the start of the arc, which is a perception I quite enjoy. But let me know in the comments below what you thought, guys, and until next time, I'll catch you later. See you then.